Now, the setting for this case is in northern Colorado. The client was a well-respected businessman. He had been in a successful business for about 25, 30 years. As he was approaching retirement, he started looking at the possibility of selling his business. Then all of a sudden, out of the clear blue, he started getting messages, phone calls, and seeing somebody from his past. The woman was essentially stalking him and saying that he was her husband. She was telling people all over town that they were back together and they had been married for the past 12 years. He started getting mail at his home with her name and his last name. This was things like credit card statements and other bills. Now, when the client finally confronted her with this, she simply stated to him that she would be happy to discuss it at home where her and the kids were planning on moving back. Now, they don't have any children together, but she had several kids from a previous marriage that went back before they had ever met originally. The kids were very young when he first met her, 12 years prior, and now they were in their teens. The client started to do some snooping around, and he discovered that she very well may be under treatment for mental health issues. He also learned that she may be involved with the sales of illegal drugs and some other felonious behavior. This video is sponsored by OREP Insurance and Working PI Magazine. OREP is a leading provider of private investigator liability insurance. Visit orep.org for a quote today. After a couple of months of these stalking activities, to include her going to his house, sitting in her car in the driveway for hours, taking care of flowers in the lawn and other outside activity as if she lived there, the client finally sought legal assistance and hired an attorney. The first thing the attorney did was file for a TRO, a temporary restraining order, against her and called me to come in and assist with an investigation. The primary objectives of this case were, number one, protect the client's assets to include hundreds of thousands of dollars, including his business, real estate, and other physical and cash assets. Number two, prove stalking existed, as she was still stalking him on an almost daily basis. And number three, provide evidence showing what, if any, level of contribution she ever had in the household. Now, the first thing I did was I interviewed the client himself to get the facts straight from him. As well, I interviewed his now current wife to complicate things even more. His current wife and the woman who alleged she was his wife were old friends. In fact, they were close friends back 12 years prior when she, the other woman, alleges that they got married. In these initial interviews, I discovered that she was waiting for him most days along a certain path to his business. As he would approach her, she'd be sitting there in her vehicle, she'd wave to him, she'd blow kisses to him, and she'd honk at him, and then she would follow him to work. Now, this was golden, as we were able to establish counter surveillance and obtain very good evidence of her essentially violating that TRO. Once we had a couple of days of that behavior, the attorney was able to have her arrested on violation of the restraining order. Now, of course, she was able to bail out quickly, but now she knew that he had private investigators working for him, so she stopped most of that activity, key word being most. Now, this all seems pretty crazy, but it gets crazier. Just hang on. Next, we interviewed all of the client's neighbors. All but one of them had lived in their current residence back 12 years prior, and they even remembered the woman. In fact, they all stated that he, the client, often had barbecues and other neighborhood-type events, and he invited them over. Further details from these interviews also led me to believe that while her kids and her lived there for a period of time, it was more off than on and never for longer than a week or two, and she was usually gone for many weeks at a time in between. This occurred over about a 6 to 12 month time frame. I also gathered information from the neighbors where none of them stated that they never were told by him or her that they were married. In fact, she often talked about how nice it was for him to let her and her kids live in the basement. The neighbors also never observed her taking part of any household chores such as cleaning the house, cleaning up after events, doing yard work, nothing. As well, no moments of intimacy in public between the two of them. Now, there were many facets to this investigation. I had multiple private investigators working different roles as it processed. The entire investigation actually took almost a year before the case went to trial. Now, one of the things that we did was we had 24-hour surveillance conducted on her residence. We were trying to see who was coming and going and who she had relations with. This surveillance indicated that there may be a high probability of drug activity at her house. However, we were never able to ascertain if she was directly involved in those activities. She had a male living with her too, which appeared that they had an intimate relationship. And her kids had lots of friends over all times, day and night. Surveillance also indicated that she would randomly leave her house and get suspiciously close to his house, not quite within the boundaries of the TRO, where she could watch his house. His residence was in a residential county neighborhood that was visible from quite a distance. Now, my attorney client asked us to look into her financial background. This is a very specialized field, folks. Not anybody can do this. So we had to bring in other partner PIs to assist us with this. The financial investigation uncovered several things. One being that her house was under foreclosure and she was just refusing to leave. We also were able to determine that she did have a good paying job, but that it might be in jeopardy due to her missing a lot of work due to her, well, let's say, erratic behaviors. We also discovered several credit lines that had been taken out using his last name, bank accounts with large overdrafts, and a lot of other things. Now, I'm talking credit lines in the tens of thousands of dollars, and they had all been maxed out. She originally had the bills going to his home address, but then later switched them to a P.O. box. We believe when they were going to his address, she was stopping by in the middle of the day and picking up those bills. Now, when we researched the P.O. box, she had set it up in his name and his business's name. We never did figure out exactly how she accomplished that. We assume that she probably used her friend who lived with her. We did pass this information on to the Postal Service, but they have never told us how that ever turned out. Now, shortly after all this started with the stalking and after the TRO, she filed for divorce. Yep, divorce, after what she called 12 years of blissful marriage. She stated she had found out that he had been unfaithful, in fact, that he had married another woman, and their kids were devastated due to the fact that her and the kids lived with him for so many years. They looked to him as a father figure, so they were his children as well. She, of course, was being very reasonable in her own mind with what she was asking for. She was just asking for possession of the house, one of the vehicles he owned, $3,000 a month in child support and spousal maintenance, and only half of the ownership of the business. She didn't want control of the business, just half the ownership, which would entitle her to half of the sale price when he sells the business. Okay, we had to attack the marriage allegation first. According to her statements, they got married at one of those Las Vegas-style wedding events. Just her and him and the minister and his wife. My client's recollection of it all was a little fuzzy. He does remember that they went through some sort of a ritual or something, but he thought it was a joke. He admitted that they had been partying for quite a few days. Now, there was a marriage certificate which she had possession of. However, there was no record of it having ever been filed with any county that I could find. The pastor and his wife did think it was the pastor's signature on it, but they kept no formal records of these events as they did so many of them, some in seriousness and some just in fun. Okay, so court time rolls around. One of the things that we tried to do was get the children up on the stand. She, of course, refused to allow the children to give testimony. We did have all of his immediate neighbors on the witness list as friendly witnesses. We also had many subjects that we had seen arrive at her house multiple times who were questioned as to how long she resided at her house and if they ever knew if she lived at the client's house, which they all answered no to this. And we had her live-in boyfriend subpoenaed too, but he was a no-show. Go figure. Her attorney had little to go on except a faded marriage certificate, which had never been filed into county records, a couple of friends of hers that could only testify to her saying that she was married, but their recollection of how long contradicted each other, and of course her own testimony. Now, the trial lasted a full day. The judge said he needed some time to go over everything and set a findings hearing for about a week after that. It was a nerve-wracking week for all involved. When we finally got the findings from the judge, it was very positive for our client and almost humorous. The judge's findings were such. He said they were married for 1 month, 12 years prior. That was due to the fact that they had 30 days to file the marriage certificate. The children were not, nor never were, his responsibility. She was awarded 1 month maintenance based on what maintenance would have been 12 years prior. She got a whopping $300. The house and the business and all other assets of our clients were his and his only, and her assets and debts were hers and hers only. This was clearly a case where she thought she could scare our client into a settlement of some kind. She had a ton of debt and no way to get out of it. And come to find out later, she did have a drug and a mental health issue problem. which compounded the situation. First lesson learned from this one was to make sure that you have a team of PI partners able to help you in most situations. I had to come up with 24-hour round-the-clock surveillance in a pinch, and I had a tough time coming up with enough investigators to do that. One thing that you can do is join your state association. Most of them have some type of a listserv that you can post jobs and get people quickly. Second lesson, interview every potential witness in every case. We did that in this case, but the client was reluctant to bring in all of his neighbors. Once convinced, it turned out to be a goldmine of friendly witnesses for us. The third lesson, never use a witness with a potential conflict of interest. Our client's current wife had a lot of damaging information about the plaintiff. But because she was friends at one point, that became problematic as well. When she was interviewed, it was discovered that she may have information that may be damaging